let's go all the way back to a problem, or rather a phenomenon and a spurious narrative that continues to persist, which is also, that narrative is also the cause for many uh, false notions about Indian history, about our culture, about our civilization and heritage, about our society. So the origins of this fake narrative or this spurious narrative has just four words. It is called the Aryan invasion theory, or its later day modification, the Aryan migration theory. The key word out here is theory, because it is exactly that. It is theory and it is not a fact, either in terms of what actually happened. Events surrounding the so-called Aryan invasion theory has been a cooked up theory in books by colonial scholars and many vested interests. This theory has been cooked up precisely because that is the Hindu civilization, and the Hindus were never conquered as a civilization by any foreigner. Sure, we had been, uh, invaded and enslaved and oppressed, but we were never 100% suppressed, in the sense that our civilization was never permanently destroyed or erased. The very fact that Hindus constitute a majority of India, even after all these things happened for, say, about a millennium, precisely shows how false this Aryan invasion or the Aryan migration theory is. Now, with that backdrop, basically what it says is that Hindus as a people were always invaded from by outsiders, and everything that India can, or the Hindu civilization can boast of, was not originally invented by Hindus, but it was given to us by conquerors and invaders. As Hindus, we have nothing to be proud of. So you see the level at which this psychological level at which this phony theory works. So with that backdrop, let's begin. Step into today's discussion. I'll begin with a beautiful quote given by Kulapati K.M. Munshi. The role of alien invasions in the history of India, hitherto exaggerated, deserves to be reduced to its appropriate proportions. But during all this period, the vitality of our race and culture expressed itself with unabated vigor. The history of India is not the story of how she underwent foreign invasions, but how she resisted them and eventually triumphed over them. I'll repeat the last line. The history of India is not the story of how she underwent foreign invasions, but how she resisted them and eventually triumphed over them. So, this is the correct perspective in which we have to understand Indian history, number one. And number two, from that, everything else flows. So, in that backdrop, I have divided today's session into about actually 13 main chapters. So when we look at all the people, all the aliens who invaded us from very ancient times, from in the BCE, before Common Era, what is a pattern that we notice? So let's address this history of alien invasions into two major parts. The first is the alien invasions that took place in the pre-Islamic or pre-Christian period, and the second broad category is the invaders who came from outside during the after Islam took birth in Arabia. So let's look at the pre-Islamic period. Who are the invaders we get there? The first earliest invader is obviously Alexander. They call him the Great, but I don't know by what measure they call him the Great. But anyway, so Alexander is the first recorded alien invader of India, not the so-called Aryans who came with their golden chariots and some kind of horses from Central Asia. That's all bogus anyway. How does our civilization remember Alexander or his invasion? It is not even like a mosquito bite. We don't take it seriously at all. At the most, what are all the areas that Alexander conquered when during his invasion? At the most, almost the whole of northwestern India. He could not even reach up to Magadha, which is Bihar today. Magadha was an extremely powerful empire in those days in India. So he could not even touch Magadha. Even he left, he died a broken man in Babylon. So this is his story. But how do we remember it? Not even like an ant bite or a mosquito bite. After him, you had the Hunas and the Shakas and the Kushanas. So all of these people, including Alexander's invasion, they were easily beaten back. The Hunas, for example, thus effortlessly expelled them to the extent that, across Europe, the Huns or the Hunas, as we call them, the Huns were a great source of terror throughout Europe. And out here, they could not even make a small dent. So this was the power of, the Hindu civilizational fight back and resistance. And the same thing goes with the Shakas and the Kushanas. But what is important is that not only were they driven back, not only were they defeated, whatever the remaining power they had in the areas in which they had conquered, they were easily assimilated and absorbed into the Hindu society, because our culture and society and civilization was extremely powerful. And they all became Hindus themselves, all these fellows, Greeks. We have this wonderful example of a Greek guy named Heliodorus. He not only converted to Sanatana Dharma, he became a Paramabhagavata. He liked to be called a Paramabhagavata, Heliodorus, and he erected a beautiful pillar inscription. You can see it. It is near Vidisha now, and it is written in pure Sanskrit. So this is the power that we had. So after this era, we come to the what is known as the Arab invasion of Sindh, which is actually a misnomer. It was done by Muhammad bin Qasim, and it was in the nature of a raid. It was not an invasion which resulted in a loss of lot of territory and a Muslim rule and the establishment of a Muslim rule. No, that's not true at all. At the most, Qasim stayed in India, not even in India, but in the general region of Sindh. He had reached all the way till Multan, and he stayed in India for less than 3 years, and then he was recalled back to Baghdad, where his own people, imprisoned him. They skinned him alive and killed him. And after he left, he had posted a governor in Multan or Mulastana, which is a ancient Tirtha Kshetra. Arab Muslims could not hold on to their positions in India for a long enough time, to the extent that one Muslim chronicler says that a place in Hindustan in which Musalmans could find refuge was nowhere to be found. What is interesting is what happens to this Muslim power after Qasim goes back. All the regions that he had conquered, or at least where he had a military presence, they were all reconquered by Hindus. And thousands of Hindus who had been forcibly converted, they came back to their Matra Dharma. Many temples that he had broken were rebuilt. So this was the dominant strength of the vigor and vitality of our civilization. After Qasim left, and till the time Mahmud of Ghazni came, there is a lull of more than 200 years, 250 years. When Mahmud came, that was a decisive turning point, that altered the course of Indian history in a way. When Mahmud came, he was proactively countered by Maharaja Jayapala Deva. I call him as the last frontier Hindu hero. So he was ruling in the general region of what is today known as Pakistan and Afghanistan, and he saw what Mahmud and Sabuktigin, Mahmud's father, what they were capable of, and he repeatedly raised an army and attacked Sabuktigin and Mahmud in order to safeguard India's borders. But anyway, he had to die. He died a hero. He had to, he committed, he immolated himself basically, committed Jauhar, because he told his subjects that, look, as your king, I was supposed to protect you, but I failed in my duty, so I have no right to live. And even when Mahmud, invaded India and reached all the way till Multan, it was not an easy victory. He encountered stiff opposition, along the way by many Hindu kings. For example, there was a great fort in Kalinjara or Kalanjara, which is today's Bundelkhand, in and around Khajuraho. There was an enormous fort, and Mahmud tried to conquer that fort, but he was met with stiff resistance there, and he had to give up and go back. No history book tells you this side of Mahmud's raids in India. Anyway, so after he goes to Somnath and destroys the temple, he finds that he cannot go back, because by that time all the powerful Hindu kings in the neighborhood, in what is today known as Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and some parts of Maharashtra, all the powerful Hindu kings, they learn what he has done to Somnath's temple, and they are thirsting for revenge. And Mahmud of Ghazni is mortally scared of these kings, and he has told in his own words that, if one of them catches me alive, I don't know what is going to happen to me. So he had to take a very long route, a very going through inside roads, in order to escape the wrath of Paramara Bhojaraja. Bhojaraja had kind of allied with many other Hindu powers. So Mahmud took a different route and back to Ghazni. So on that route, he found in Hindu merchant or a Hindu businessman or some kind of a messenger. This messenger promised Mahmud that, look, you give me some money or whatever, I'll show you a secret route through which you can reach Ghazni safely. So he takes him to the Sindh desert, and for an entire week, he misleads Mahmud. And then finally, Mahmud finds that, this fellow is cheating me and making me run around in this hot desert. The damage is so bad that Mahmud's army, I think 25 or 30% of his entire army, they are starving and they're thirsty and they're dead because of the heat in the desert. So he captures this Hindu guy and this Hindu messenger who misled him, and then he kills him. And he has to find his own way back to Ghazni, and it's a torturous route. So by the time he reaches the bank of Sindhu River, half of his wealth is gone. And then on the border, as he's about to cross the Sindhu River and enter Multan, he's met by a force, an army of Jats, and they have a naval battle. And Mahmud again suffers heavy losses, but somehow he wins the battle and goes back to Ghazni. By the time he reaches his capital, 90% of his wealth is gone. So these are stories nobody will tell you, and these are actually Hindu triumphs in that sense. And after Mahmud, you have Muhammad Ghori, and in one of his first expeditions, Ghori is actually he takes inspiration from Mahmud, who is regarded as a Ghazi. So Ghori he offers a prayer at Mahmud's dargah, and he says, "Look, you are my hero, and please bless me in my invasions against infidel Hindustan." So he follows the same route as Mahmud, and in Gujarat, in a narrow pass, mountain pass in Gujarat, he is met with an army which is led by a teenager belonging to clan of the Chalukya dynasty. This boy is about 14, 15, 16 years old. He leads the army from the front and batters Mahmud Ghori's army so badly that this fellow has to retreat and he has to go back once again to Ghazni. So this is, at every step, the impression that is being created by our history textbooks is that all these invaders, they had a very, very easy passage into India, that they met no resistance at all from Hindus. The real truth is opposite, actually. They didn't have it easy. So from the time, Qasim entered, he captured Multan, and till the time Qutbuddin Aibak established the so-called Delhi Sultanate, you had that was a period of 320 years of stiff non-stop resistance. And from the Delhi Sultanate till the invasion of Babur, you had another 200 years. So that's 500 years of solid Hindu resistance, marked by several triumphs and setbacks for a lot of setbacks for the alien Muslim invaders. So this story is not narrated at all. And even after the Delhi Sultanate was established, so-called Delhi Sultanate was established, its maximum extent until Alauddin Khalji came to the scene, the maximum area that the so-called Delhi Sultanate controlled did not exceed 120 kilometers. This is an important point, and even there, Even within that, the Delhi Sultanate, it lasted for what? Till for about 200, 250 years. Even during that entire period, it was more that their rule was known for instability, and they lived in the constant threat of Hindu aggression and resistance. It was not an easy cakewalk for them. For example, Balban, who was one of the cruelest sultans, a semi-barbarian, a bigot who believed that only the Turkic Muslims had been given the right to rule the whole world by Allah Himself. This is what he believed in. And this fellow persecuted Hindus even in peacetime. For example, today you're all familiar, you're all reading the news about what is happening in Nu, in Mewat, Haryana. But originally, that Mewat region was extremely vast. It included, today's Haryana, Gurgaon, Faridabad, Alwar in Rajasthan. On this side, on the other side, Mathura in UP. Today, when we speak about mayors, we automatically, even Hindus automatically assume that they are Muslims. It's not true at all. Mayors have undated antiquity of thousands of years. So these were frontline Hindu warriors like Jats and another Hindu tribe known as Ghakkars, Mayos or Mewatis. These trace their lineage to Kshatriyas, and their Kuldevatas were Rama and Krishna. Even till 1920s, Mayo Muslims living in the southern region of Delhi near Mathura, they had legends. They celebrated Janmashtami. Anyway, that now they've become radicalized. So we are, as Hindus, we don't know that they were Hindus. As long as they retain their Hindu roots, they kept on fighting these Muslim invaders. They kept on trying to recover their lost power. It was so bad for the Muslims that during Balban's rule, in one single day, he committed a genocide of 1 lakh Mayos, Hindu Mayos, in the surroundings of Delhi. By the time Babur comes and he occupies a throne, after his death, Humayun has to abdicate the throne. He's a weak ruler. Even before that, we have the story of Hemachandra. Our textbooks call him as Hemu. What is Hemu? Hemu can mean anything, right? It can mean a man, it can mean a bird, it can mean an animal, it can mean the name of a dish, anything. What is Hemu? His name is Hemachandra Vikramaditya. For the first time after 250 years of continuous Muslim rule on the throne of Delhi, Hemachandra Vikramaditya recaptures it and establishes a Hindu rule out there. Some people call him the Napoleon of India, but that's a far-fetched comparison. But anyway, so just to illustrate his greatness after 250 years of continuous Muslim occupation. If this is not triumph, what else is it? Remember that Hemu started his career as a seller of fruit in the fruit market in Delhi. It's a very inspiring tale. So now, if that is this picture on, in North India and Middle India, the rise of Vijayanagara Empire, that is undoubtedly the greatest triumph for the Hindu civilization in an extremely critical period when almost the whole of north of India was ravaged by the Muslim rule. And here, in the entire South India, including Orissa, this entire belt was safeguarded by the Vijayanagara Empire, who were proud to call themselves as the guardians and custodians of Hindu Dharma. Without Vijayanagara Empire, my name would be Samiullah or something else. That is the extent of service, that is the extent of protection that the Vijayanagara Empire gave to Hindu civilization. So from Vijayanagara, we can turn to, once again, go back to North India, the Mughal period. There we notice Maharana Pratap. When all other Rajput kings have, either made illicit deals with Akbar, this was the only Hindu king who never bowed down his head. Till the end, he did not give up fighting Akbar. In fact, Maharana Pratap is the greatest failure of Akbar, the so-called great. In his early career, Akbar was no different from, say, Balban or Alauddin Khalji or any of those bigots. But it is a tribute to Hindu valor that Maharana Pratap launched more than 30 battles for reconquering Chittorgarh. And he, in fact, reconquered many forts that had been lost to Muslims. Why is this story not a triumph? In fact, there is a beautiful story, very, very moving story of uh, uh, of a bard, a singer, folk singer. Once he goes to some court of some king, and he narrates a tale, a folk song, and the king is impressed, and he says, "Look, I'm happy with you. Take your reward," and he offers the reward. And this bard is wearing a pagadi, a turban on his head, and he removes that turban, keeps it in his other hand, and bows down to the king and accepts the reward. So that fellow asks, the king asks him, "Why have you removed the turban?" He says, "Forgive me, Maharaj, but this turban was first given to me, was placed on my head by Maharana Pratap. I will not allow even his turban to bow before any king. If this is not a saga of heroism and triumph and resistance, what else is?" Immediately after the death of Akbar, we get a very interesting data point in Jahangir's rule. It might surprise all of you to know that the actual area controlled by Jahangir is less than one-third of India. His rule extends only to the main commercial cities like Surat, Machilipatnam, all these main centers, Delhi, Agra, all the Ajmer, all these main centers, all the commercial cities and political capitals. Just 20% away from these main cities, that entire region was not under the effective control of Jahangir. In fact, even in Afghanistan, in remote kingdoms, tribal kingdoms of Afghanistan, the kings out there, they controlled very minor areas, very, very small parts of land. Some of the kings out there in those valleys and regions of Afghanistan, they had not even heard the name of Jahangir. These are all available. These are all, so what, pan-India Mughal Empire are we talking about? And when Jahangir's officials tried to collect revenue from all those small areas, they were beaten back. This is recorded. So after Jahangir, we get to Shah Jahan. What happens in Shah Jahan's rule? All his grand buildings, Taj Mahal and all that, they have a dark side. They also have a very, very sorry side. Jahangir's regime is notorious for its instability and its lawlessness. Bandits and robbers, even Delhi, the capital, and even Agra, the capital, was not safe from robbers. The gates of Agra and Delhi were shut after the afternoon namaz. So this was a city where the Badshah resided. And this was a sorry plight, that ordinary robbers could rush into the capital city, loot whatever they wanted and go back. Nobody could control them. The other sorry part of Shah Jahan's rule was that he had bankrupted the entire economy. It was so bad that in Bengal, his taxes were so enormous, so oppressive, that in Bengal, parents would forcibly castrate their boys, small boys. They would castrate them and sell them as slaves because they could not pay tax. Glorious Mughal Empire. And there were revolts and rebellions and resistance breaking out throughout. The Rajputs again were regrouping, and Madhya Pradesh was a mess in Jahangir's time. Bengal was also a mess. Deccan was also a mess. And it is all this combined that, the climax is reached during Aurangzeb's period. Of all the Mughal emperors, Aurangzeb controlled the maximum extent of territory in India. He managed to capture a lot of territories, and his whole life, you all know his story, so I don't need to get into details. So his entire rule is marked by a series of unnecessary wars and a stated policy to suppress and oppress Hindus deliberately as part of a pure Islamic rule. This is a story you all know, all the temple destructions, jizya tax, and the rest of it. But Aurangzeb's cruel regime, his bigoted rule, was also his ultimate undoing and the ultimate victory of Hindus. If Aurangzeb had not done what he did, if he had not committed this kind of oppression against Hindus, unprovoked aggression, unprovoked breaking of temples, he stopped Deepavali celebrations, stopped other celebrations of Holi, for example. What our Supreme Court is doing now, he did in a much more cruel fashion. So that cost him his entire empire. But for his, fanatical aggression, the Marathas wouldn't have risen. The Chandelas in Bundelkhand wouldn't have risen. Chhatrasal would not have emerged as such a huge power. Muslim political power would not have been would not have collapsed in such a dramatic fashion. This was a single-handed work done by Aurangzeb, who destroyed the foundations of Islamic power in India. So after that, you have another great uh, rejuvenation and renewal of Hindu political power in the form of Marathas. They recapture a lot of our territories. You have a series of extraordinary Peshwa rulers after Shivaji. And down south, what Aurangzeb tried to did in 50 years, Tipu Sultan tried to do the same thing in 17 years with the same consequences. Remember, Tipu left behind no empire and he died like a dog. After this, we come to the British takeover of India. Now, there is one more myth which basically says that just like how all the alien invaders, had a cakewalk of capturing, of destroying Hindu political power, British also did the same thing. No, it didn't happen like that. We have to, we are also at fault for doing what we did for infighting and various other things. But on the other side, even the British, they did not conquer India in that military sense. They gobbled up India piece by piece. And by that time, after Maharaja Ranjit Singh and the downfall of the Peshwas, the battle for, the battle that Hindu powers could give was effectively over. So they began to sign all kinds of illegal treaties with the British. But what also happened during the British rule, which the effective British rule under the Crown of England was just 90 years. If you take 1858 and 1947, so that's roughly about 90 years. They did a lot of damage, but the biggest damage they did was to the Hindu psyche. No Muslim rule could do. Muslim rulers, sultans, they treated Hindus as dhimmis, as zimmis, as second class, third class citizens. But they were never able to break the pride that Hindus took in their dharma. This the British did. Hindus were oppressed, but they were never ashamed of themselves. This the British did. But that's a story we all know, Macaulay and the rest of the things, and the university system that also did a lot of damage. But anyway, the brighter side of the British rule is that it gave birth to what I call as the modern Hindu Renaissance. So this is a period that roughly started in the second half of the 19th century and ended in the second half of the 20th century. So that's roughly between 1850 and 1950. So this period of modern Hindu Renaissance, it is comparable to, say, in a different perspective, it is comparable to the Hindu Renaissance that occurred under the Vijayanagar Empire. In every field, in archaeology, in history, in spirituality, in social service, in health, in science, in every field, there was a huge wave of awakening across India. Generations, about when you say 100 years, 5 to 6 generations at least, of exemplary people, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Aurobindo Ghosh, Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, P.V. Kane, D.V. Gundappa. That you take a region that has produced, pure gold in the form of these persons. So what this period did, this modern Hindu Renaissance, is that it took the tools that the British had given us, say English education, new discoveries in science, experiments, technology. It took all these things, and the luminaries of the modern Indian Renaissance, they used those tools to discover the greatness of our past. Brilliant works that have come out in that period have to be rediscovered today. So this period of modern Indian Renaissance, that is one of the ultimate triumphs that indirectly gave political and social capital, and which also shaped many contours of our freedom struggle. And in fact, 1857, the first war of Indian independence, in 1857, that was the last mass movement of resistance which was entirely homegrown. Its ideas were from this Indian soil. So after the movement, the freedom movement that came after that, if you want to trace the Indian freedom, origins of the modern Indian freedom movement to 1885, which is when the Congress party was formed, it was that idea was not, the ideas and the methods were not homegrown. They were not native to India. They were informed by ideas of democracy, nationalism, other things from the West. Sure, there was a mixture of Indian ideas also, but the bedrock of it, the foundation of it, were ideas derived from the West. So that is a key difference. But at any rate, a lot of movements, inspiration, programs, agitations during the freedom movement, our freedom movement was inspired by Hindu heroes, by Ramayana, Mahabharata, our Puranas, our legends, our symbols, our devas and devatas. For example, Bharatamata, the very notion of Bharatamata and Vande Mataram, it's a short poem which occurs, a song which occurs in Bankim's Anand Math. So that became our national song. That became the slogan of the Indian freedom struggle. It is entirely Hindu. What is known as Bharatamata is another form of Devi or Parvati, Durga, Kali, whatever you want to call it. This leg of Indian freedom struggle was entirely inspired by various aspects of Hindu Dharma. So, from that perspective, 99% of our freedom struggle, its methods, its inspirations, it was a struggle to liberate the Hindu homeland and to recover and rejuvenate the Hindu civilization expressed in the form of the Hindu nation, which we were supposed to get in 1947, but which we still haven't got. At any rate, 1947, what the freedom that we got at the cost of partition, okay, that was the ultimate civilizational triumph. It came at a great cost, but it was a triumph. And there is a need for a serious re-evaluation of some of these elements of the Hindu elements of the Indian freedom struggle. We need to kind of, assess them afresh. And on that note, I will conclude my submission today.